Welcome to the always entertaining, somewhat irreverent CMC Podcast. I'm Craig McClure here with LeRoy Harbach, John McKently, and Jason Ilowite. Today we're talking about books that influenced our careers or us as a person. So, gentlemen, I play a little game at the beginning. Let's go around the room. Tell me where you are and what's the last class you taught. LeRoy.
Yes. I am in beautiful downtown Bakersfield, actually just outside of the always entertaining Oildale, California. Currently doing a rope class. Last class that I taught was last week, contract class at a paper mill.
All right. Mr. McKently.
I'm at home in Atascadero, California, and the last class I taught was Rope Rescue Technician 1-2 in St. Louis last week.
Jason?
Hey, I'm lucky enough to be sitting at home in Dickerson, Maryland, which is Montgomery County, just outside of the District of Columbia. And the last class I taught, I was the third instructor for a Rope 1 and 2 class in Slidell, Louisiana. Still doing the new guy thing, going through my task book. I got another class coming up, actually, very shortly here in Rifle, Colorado. So looking forward to it, keeping it moving.
Cool. Well, we're happy to have you. I'm Craig. I'm sitting at home in Memphis, Colorado. I'm home for a little bit. Last class I taught was a Rope 1-2 with LeRoy in Richmond, California. And the thing I learned about that was don't let LeRoy book the hotel rooms. All right. So the question comes to us pretty frequently. What books should we read before we come to class? Or what are great books on rescue? And we could give you a list of technical books, but they're really not that fun to talk about. So I wanted to pull this group together to talk about the other kind of books. What are the books that have influenced you as a person, changed how you teach, changed how you approach people? What is still relevant to your career, but maybe not a technical book? So I have a few, but really I want to hear what other people have to say. So anybody want to kick it off? What's on your list?
I've got three big ones. I wrote it down on a notepad for myself with a couple notes of why it was so important to me. So the first one I have, it's called The Mission, the Men, and Me by Peter Blaber. I might be completely butchering his last name, but has anybody else read that, or am I a lone ranger there?
No, have not read that book. I've heard of it before, but I have not read that one.
Man, so it was recommended to me. I was getting ready to kind of promote in the fire department, and a couple friends, hey man, like you really need to read this book. So I think it's one of those books that has this lasting effect of relevance when it comes to leadership for one, but for two, just how we approach problems and how we take information in and make decisions about it. So this dude was the author, Peter Blaber, was, I guess, a former Delta Force soldier. And he kind of goes through, a lot of his experiences with that and some of his biggest takeaway lessons. So like some of I guess the title is somewhat self-explanatory, being The Mission, the Men, and Me. But, it's kind of setting this foundation of operational priorities, so you relate that to the rescue world, everything we do, we have to be able to prioritize that. And I think it's a really good foundation, when we're starting to get to those crossroads and we've got decisions to make. How is this going to affect the mission? Whatever that may be. And then aside from that, how is this going to affect my people? And then lastly, how is this going to affect me? The least important of all of that. And so there's a bunch of different nuance, within all of that we could certainly talk about or not. But that's one of the biggest ones for me. Like I reread that book probably once every 6 months because I think the lessons in it they're so valuable.
No, it actually sounds really interesting because I've read some other stuff previously kind of on that same genre, whether they be operators, Delta Force, Green Beret, SEALs, PJs, because let's face it, they're all out there in harm's way doing whatever. Obviously their decisions or the decisions that they make affect a fairly wide raft of people. That one, I actually wrote that one down because I read a fair amount.
Yeah, no, I think one of the biggest things to me, like one of the biggest motifs of that book, if you will, he mentions it all the time about listening to the guy on the ground. So that's so important, like, especially for, those of us with the fire service background and anything in the rescue world, how often are decisions being made for us by people without the context and who may be completely removed from the situation, and the decisions they're making don't necessarily affect them anymore, but it has great effect on the team, So this overarching lesson of like, hey, like we need to be talking and listening and getting the perspective of the people who, these decisions affect before we're, making a final call on it type of thing. So, yeah, I thought that was really neat about that book.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what my dad grew up in Wisconsin, right? Middle of Buxtehude, nowhere, 250 people spread out over 56 square miles. Which is about how I like it, by the way. But my dad always used to say, when growing up as a kid, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them appropriately, like listen twice as much as you say something. And I think that, to be honest with you, I think a lot of that gets lost.
Yeah, totally. And it was always a good reminder for myself, too, as a maybe entry-level supervisor, if you want to call it that, at work. Like, I think we all need a little bit of a reminder sometimes, like, hey, like, we don't know it all. And, a lot of these people who are serving under us probably know way better. And we need to consult them. Like, we need to ask them. And, it just applies to everything in life. It definitely applies, I think, to the rescue world and everything we're doing here. So, yeah, no, just a cool one.
Yeah, Jason, I've always stuck with the mantra that you can be smarter than anyone, but never smarter than everyone. Right. When you put a group of people together, someone's going to know something about it more than you do. Next time we'll put that sentence in a logical order, but what the heck. All right. So, John, do you have anything that kind of tails into that one? Anything on the leadership realm?
Yeah, well, it's funny. When this thing came up, I had a lot of books about leadership and I read them. And when I moved, a lot of them left. The bookshelf length I have more bookshelf space, but the amount of material on it went down. There was a major culling of a lot of those kinds of books. And I kind of was going back going, God, what were those? And some of them, and the only one that I did keep, and it's kind of one that LeRoy would like a lot of it is, probably goes with a little bit with my irreverent style or something like that, was a book that I got probably my second year of college by a guy named Robert Townsend, who was generally credited with turning around Avis. And he wrote a book called Up the Organization. And you can kind of figure from the title of it that that's what it was about. In other words, these are kind of organizational pitfalls and things like that. And it probably explains a lot of my career, having followed that book. And all the rest of those big old management and leadership books and all the ones that I had since then went to the Goodwill of the Salvation Army or somebody like that and didn't get moved. But Townsend stayed with me, and 50 plus years later, that stuff is still appropriate. A lot of the things he says and the things you see both in, private industry and in organizations about kind of things you've talked about. People that are on the top that don't realize who's doing the work and what's going on and what they've forgotten and misplaced priorities and all that sort of thing. So my normal reading does not include those kinds of books. I know some of you, read those kinds, and organizational leadership or things like that. And I tend to stick to nonfiction, but usually historical things. Oftentimes geographic things. I've read all the Thomas Starr books about California history, a number of them. There was a large series of those kinds of books. I do read some world history stuff, and it always comes back that those people that don't read history are bound to repeat it. And I screwed up that quote, but you know what I'm saying. In kind of going, reading some things like the history of World War II, the origins of World War II, and how so much of that is appropriate right now and what the hell is going on and that sort of thing. So it's that whole leadership stuff. Like I said, I most of them I've read them. It probably went in, one ear or whatever and out the other. And you look at that and go, "This is common sense. Treat people right and move on." No recommendations from anybody there.
All right, so I've got one that I didn't think I'd put in the leadership category, but it's Norman MacLean's Young Men in Fire. And Jason, you nodding your head that you've read it? Is that what I'm seeing?
I have heard of it. I haven't read it, though, but I'm definitely intrigued to learn more.
So it's the story of the Man Gulch Fire, which is one of the first big kind of documented conflagration fires in the West. Don't remember the year, but it was long enough ago that they were raising hand crews by going into the bars and offering them cash and just pulling them out onto the fire line. And as with any fire incident you read the after action, communication and leadership are the breakdowns that get people killed. And there's part of the story here where there's this fundamental shift in understanding of survival and fire behavior. But because they hadn't trained it, no one wanted to follow the leader. And the leader lived and few other people did. And I can't remember his name, but they're running uphill away from the fire, which is a bad place to be, running uphill from fire. And he stopped, he bent down, he lit a match, and he burned his own black circle and laid down. And he lived. But everybody else thought he was crazy because they'd never thought of it, they'd never seen it, they'd never trained it. And they kept running through dry grass, and he created his own safe zone. And I come back to that pretty frequently, that sometimes to me, the big changes are from people you don't expect, and you have to pay attention when they happen. They might not be obvious that a fundamental shift is happening from one little tiny good idea, but that was a fundamental shift for me.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I think that a lot of times, especially if you're intimately involved, it's too close, you can't see it. You don't understand the change that has taken place because you're right there. You can't see what the influence is. You can't see the change in thought process.
Anything else? Gentlemen, what do we got?
I think that's a pretty cool or applicable concept, Craig, about, just the leader who, had kind of been he started doing something that hadn't really been trained and no one was really familiar with it. So obviously I haven't read this book, but I'm assuming it was kind of looked upon as like I think you kind of mentioned, what is this guy doing? Like he's crazy.
Why did he stop running? Yeah, totally. And I think, to kind of bring that full circle to a lot of this stuff, we get involved in the rescue world, that happens all the time, ideas, techniques, all of that stuff gets discounted all the time, in classes, heck, even on rescues, because people might not necessarily be familiar with it. Now, I think we could all put a caveat there, like the rescue ground is not the time to try that new idea. What would happen if?
Yeah, exactly. Hey guys, let's try this one. I know you haven't drilled on it before, but just follow my lead kind of thing. Yeah, it's not the best time, right? But the training ground, that happens all the time. People kind of close themselves off. And it's like, man, that's where we need to be figuring this stuff out, because for all we know, like you said, man, you could have uncovered the way to do it. You don't want to bypass something that could really be game changing for your team, so to speak.
Yeah. And like you said, with your first recommendation, mission, the man and me, you need to be listening to everyone. And sometimes I think we get blind that we have our ideas, and a new idea is something to be fought, not something to be examined and really considered.
Totally. Yeah.
It just kind of makes me laugh, because it makes me think about the whole twin tension rope system thing.
Oh boy.
No, man. And to be honest with you, it's, to me, and John may or may not be able to attest to this, depending on how feeble his memory is. But the whole twin tension thing, to me, is welcome to 1980 whatever.
Mm-hmm.
because that's what we were doing back in the day. Now, granted, there was no data, there was no testing, there was nothing. But it wasn't up until, what was it, John, 94, 95? When the presentation was made about how horrible that is to have two ropes under tension, because rockfall will cut both ropes and everyone will.
Yeah, because that was the whole thing, that the rockfall will cut a tensioned rope. And when you have the slack wind, that's not going to happen. Of course, it's not very often that the rockfall cuts a loaded rope, but it's another story.
Yeah, we seldom have rockfalls in industrial rescues. And if you do, we have a whole nother set of problems that we have to deal with. I mean, granted, we had no data, we had nothing. Now there's data to essentially take us back to 40 years ago. And I'm dating myself. But you kind of look at it and you go, it makes total sense. We were right, but we had no clue why. It just made sense to us.
So, LeRoy, you mentioned your history, your memory of 40 or 50 years of rope rescue. You're in a hotel room. Normally, I look at you in your office, and there's a wall of binders and books and everything. We won't talk
about
my
library, dude.
That's the word I would use for it. Library. Good call. Such a vocabulary for you.
Yeah, big words.
What are the big hitters in that library? What's up there?
Green eggs and ham. All the places you'll go. Those are like two of them. I reread those about every quarter or so.
Those are good ones, man.
Actually, I mean, yeah, I've read a lot of the manuals and that kind of stuff on technical rescue. One of the ones that was actually a big influence to me, as far as putting the pieces of the puzzle together, was actually sitting down and reading the U.S. Army rigging manual from 1969, which has been out of print for, I think, since like 75. Only because to me, it's basic mechanical stuff, which has always fascinated me. I mean, I got into rescue not by reading rescue stuff, but by reading survival stories, which to me were always fascinating. In fact, one of the best ones that I've read is a book. Deadliest Seas. It's about the Coast Guard. And it's by the Caley. Thompson is the author. To me, it was just fascinating. Survival story after survival story. Why did some people survive? Why did they not? Did it come down to preparation? Was it thought process? Was it background and experience? I read a lot of World War II stuff. In fact, I just finished this one on the airplane ride here.
For those that know that a podcast is audio only, LeRoy just held up a book called Damn Lucky.
Yes,
there we go.
Damn Lucky by Kevin Marr. But it's about a guy who was a pilot on B-17s in World War II and flying with the 8th Air Force. And to me, it was really fascinating because they kind of go through what happened at the beginning of the war, what happened in the middle part of the war, what happened towards the end. And back then it was 25 missions, successful missions that you returned from and you went home. But he talks about the losses and the mental strain and stress, and how they thought through, or how he and the other members of his crew kind of thought through the process of, if this happens, what happens then? If we get shot down, what do we do? If we're POWs, all that type of thing. It's, to me, the Greatest Generation is not a real joke. It's legitimately, those guys were solving problems on the fly, which is a lot like rescue.
Yeah, I love the survival stories. I think nowadays when you bring up survival stories, everyone goes to Gonzalez, or is that how you pronounce his name? Deep Survival. Which I actually have some issues. I'm not sure all of that's entirely true. But one of my favorites in the whole survival realm, actually recommended by Eddie Cartaya, is We All Die Alone. And that was later made into a movie but it was a World War II soldier who transited the northern latitudes. I can't do it justice. Just it's worth the read. Just go read it. We all die alone. I read it, I watch the movie, and I still don't think it's true. And then you can read interviews with the guy who actually did. I'm going to spoil it for you. He lives. That's why we have the story. But when you talk about survival, I'm going to take it another direction, LeRoy. You probably can't see that. None of you can. It's Dr. Heidi Squire Craft's book, Rule Number 2. And this book was given to me by an academy mate in my first law enforcement academy who was I think he was an Oregon National Guard surgeon who deployed and seen a lot of death. And I'd just come off this string of SAR missions, death after death after death, and then a plane crash where we were picking body parts out of trees. I was really struggling. And he gave me this book, and I've probably given away a dozen copies of this book at this point in my life. And it's about this psychologist who's sent overseas on deployment to be a resource to soldiers. And she's deployed with a helicopter mechanic unit. And they get retasked while they're over there to become the morgue. So these guys who are trained as mechanics are now hosing blood out of Humvees and stacking bodies in a tent. And they had no idea how to deal with it, neither did she. And rule number 2, McKently, do you know where rule number 2 comes from?
No, but what was it? Make sure you repeat the title of the book again.
Rule number 2. Thanks, John.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Well, it comes from a TV show that was filmed in your backyard. In the mountains behind you. Comes from MASH, where Hawkeye is going through a mental breakdown, which we would now call PTSD, and his commanding officer says there are 2 rules of combat. The first rule is young men die. The second is there's nothing we can do to save them. And the premise of this book is that there's nothing we can do to save them isn't true. And we just need to be better at treating mental health in the field. So there's one from me.
That's awesome, man. That's an interesting one. That's definitely going on the list for sure.
Yeah, I'm busy writing these things down too, and especially I've become in maybe it's time or whatever, more and more interested in PTSD or whatever they call it again now. It's not that. I learned recently that they don't call it that anymore, but I'm more interested in that and what it's doing to survivors and people like that. So I appreciate it.
It's if you spend any time in emergency services, it's in all of us somewhere at some depth to some degree. Jason, what else is on your list?
Yeah, man, I think LeRoy actually alluded to or said something that kind of cued my mind for one of my books that I have written down here in relation to one of his books about like decision-making process and stuff like that. And so I don't know. I take a pretty big interest in like what makes people tick. Everything we do is people based, right? Like the technical skills, all of that kind of stuff doesn't matter if you don't have the people to do it. So I guess I'm always curious, like, how do we get to the root of, I don't know, why people think the way they do, what prompts them to make the decisions that they do. So there's this book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I think I'm saying that right.
That was probably 2 or 3 down off my top 3 list. It was there.
Oh, dude.
Absolutely. Yep. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, maybe you might be able to talk on it better than I can. But I guess for the general audience out there, if folks have not read it, it breaks down our thought process, or he breaks down our thought process into 2 different systems. So it's a pretty lengthy book, so there's a lot of elaboration there. But the system 1 is what he describes as our automatic decision-making type of thing. When we see something, we don't even there's no intentional thought there. Our brain just, it is what it is. Almost a fight or flight type of thing. Just that automatic decision making type of thing. System 2 is that intentional thought, complex computation, that kind of thing. Like something that you have to actually sit down and think about and come up with a decision. So what's interesting is how, he relates System 1 to System 2. Basically he talks about how System 1 gives System 2 suggestions. And if that suggestion gets endorsed by your System 2, it makes them into voluntary actions. So it's interesting to kind of break down how people make decisions, how they arrive, at the decisions they do. And I don't know, I think the more understanding we have of stuff like that, the more predictability we might have dealing with certain people problems and all of that kind of stuff. What do you got, Craig? Like, I'm sure you got plenty more to talk about with that one.
Well, what that one really made me think deeper about was this saying that's almost become trite, which is what smooth is fast. What
slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Yeah, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And when you read through his breakdown of how we make decisions, that's not true. What it comes down to is do the slow things slowly, do the fast things fast, put your energy where it can be best used in the right context. There are just certain things you can't rush. And there are certain things that if you do slowly, you don't do better than you do them fast. Just do the things you do and do them well. But this concept of rote muscle memory, doing it slow, yes, you eventually build speed through repetition. But it's not as simple as smooth is slow, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Totally, man.
And for me, it was pretty relatable to everything emergency services because, there's times when we get so tunneled in with whatever it is that we're doing. We're doing things that generally don't require any thought. There are automatic muscle memory type of skills and whatever it is that we're doing. Firefighting for me comes to mind, with the forcing a door, the pulling a line, the throwing a ladder. Like those are things we generally do without thought. But how many times are we doing those things and we're so tunneled in to just being on autopilot that we miss really important things going on around us? So I think that book kind of shed some light for me and kind of made me think about like, man, you need to slow it down a little bit. Like you need to be able to activate that System 2 thinking while you're engaged in System 1 activities and be able to take in the big picture so you don't miss important things. So that was a really good one for me. I love that book.
Do it right once. In other words, slow down a little bit, do it right once, as opposed to having to go back and do something again, which is nothing more than, time wasting is essentially where he was coming from. He's like, no, man, preparation is everything. Do it right once and then be done with it, as opposed to kind of how I've lived most of my life. We call that learning through experience or bad decision making. Take your pick on which way you prefer to phrase it.
Yeah, I see that in classes. I see students get flustered and they try to do something fast and they don't get it right. And they try to do it fast a second time and they don't get it right. And if you just get them to stop and take a deep breath and break that cycle, they'll slow down and get it right.
Yes, because they're trying to get it fast, but for some reason there seems to be enough time to redo it. Take the time. It's like, how come there's enough time to do it the second time? Just do it slow and surely the first time and not have to do it twice. It'll be faster in the long run.
Yeah, and that speed they did it may be as fast as they ever have to do that task. They may never need to do it faster than doing it right. All right, what else you got, LeRoy? I know there's more in that brain.
I was just jotting down a couple of things. Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun comes to mind, which sounds really horrible.
Did you help transcribe that as it was written?
Yeah, my Mandarin is really bad, and so is my Cantonese. So there may be some misinterpretations in there. And I understand it sounds horrible at face value. It really does. But when you think of what he as an individual did or accomplished. And I'm not talking about all the other issues, but as far as a leader, unbelievable as far as the tactics, the strategies, the everything else that he developed. I mean, it kind of goes back to when we were talking about before the podcast, Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Okay. When you really think about it, there was a lot of thought process that went into everything. And a lot of those same lessons kind of carry through as far as the leadership aspect of, and especially Attila the Hun. And he wasn't a nice guy and all those kind of things. But as far as a leadership,
it kind of sounds like you're commending John Wilkes Booth on his marksmanship here, right? It just seems wrong. Dude, keep going.
Anybody can be a good marksman from 2 feet away. All right. I mean, even me, right? No, but if you look at just the fact that the amount of people that he was leading, and there was virtually zero questions. I mean, granted, he didn't tolerate it, but there was virtually zero questions. And their techniques, his strategies, his tactics on what he perceived to be problem solving, or, hi, I'm here to take over your country. But when you look at it, there's a lot of valuable lessons as far as leadership. Granted, you have to read between the lines because the book does get a little graphic.
Are there specifics you take into the rescue world?
Yeah, actually, there are. And it's not the fact of unquestioning loyalty. It's the fact that his personnel, his trusted personnel around him, ask questions all the time. Not only questioned his thought process, but they actually questioned his tactics, his strategies. Do you think this is the best way to go about doing whatever it is they were doing at the time? Which to me was kind of way different than what I had learned when we were reading off of chiseled stone when I was in school. I went there before you could. So, but he actually encouraged his people to question things, his trusted cadre, if you will, which I always encouraged. I mean, when I was on the job, it was like, hey, man, this is an information sharing thing. This is not I'm in charge kind of a deal. I need your input because there's something I am not going to see. And we all miss it. I mean, when you and I were together in Richmond, you're questioning, dude, this is just a bad idea. And I'm like, no, it'll be fine.
I'm not sure which one you're talking about. I think there were several.
Well, there were several during the course of the week, but the one on Friday when we were on board ship, and it was like, are you sure this is going to work?
Yeah, I honestly thought it was too complex for their skill set, and it worked.
Yeah, it did. But if you remember their communications aspect, I mean, this is towards the end of the day on Friday, their communications aspect, I didn't see any fall down whatsoever because everybody understood essentially not only their part of the plan, but the overall big picture. And that's really what the book kind of gets into is we miss a lot of times the individual things, but the bigger picture is really kind of the leader's job is to have that 30,000 foot view. And you guys have heard me say it a million times. You got to be hovering at 30 or 35,000 feet. You can't get involved with the minutia. It's like, give everybody the big picture. They get their jobs. They understand their tasks. Here's where you fit. And that's essentially what the book actually goes through is here's where you fit. You don't see it because I'm only giving you this much information. But the big picture is this, and there's a definite, end goal.
You don't see it often. We had a student in the Vegas 1-2 class. It was a 1-2. Yeah, the Vegas 1-2 class, who just gave an absolutely fantastic briefing on the final day. And it was about a 5-minute briefing. You could tell he had experience, but he went through his plan. He gave each of his key people their piece of the mission. And the last question he asked was, is there anything I missed? Like he opened the floor to say, Tell me what I'm not doing right. Tell me what we don't have correct here. It's fantastic briefing.
Yeah, I think that might be like the biggest point we've talked about so far, man. Like I feel so strongly about that. And mainly because like I've seen it, I've seen supervisors out there that are so down the rabbit hole of centralized command. Everything must go through them. They have the final say with everything. They ask for no input. They ask for no opinions. And what happens. Either the operation goes well or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, they're definitely not owning it. It'll be someone else's fault at that point. So like the stuff that you guys are talking about allowing, your team to like, you have to be open to those questions. And really it comes down to a safety thing, an efficiency thing, and like a quick personal story for me, like a very recent one. We were, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, like going down the road in the rig to what had every appearance of like a very legitimate rope rescue. There was a base jumper that jumped off like a 300-foot bridge. And a gust of wind came, got him stuck all up in the superstructure of the bridge, and like he was hurt and, stuck about 150 feet, above the Shenandoah River. So we're going down the road and we're getting all these pictures of kind of what's going on. So luckily, like I've got some real heavy hitters with rope on my shift, and I'm super thankful for that. So, we're all kind of war gaming it together, going down the road, looking at these pictures. Man, like I could have, it's definitely not in my style, but there are other people that easily would have sat there and said, hey man, like I'm the rope guy. What I say goes. And that would have been it. Just come up with a decision and gone with it. But I wanted, like, I wanted to hear what the guys had to say. And it just so happened that, one of my dudes in the back had given his take on what might work well. And it was brilliant. Like, I'm like, dude, this is 110% the plan that we're going to go with if we get there and actually have to get on rope. So, like that guy's not equal rank to me. Like he's a fireman, and but he had the best idea on the rig that day. And I think that is, you just can't discount that. So no, it's a long-winded way to say, like, I really appreciate you guys bringing up that point. That's a big one.
Yeah, I had a medical director that used to drive that home with us with a very simple saying that said, he'd say, never set yourself up to carry the coffin alone. All right,
that's
like if you're going to stand up there and you're going to make the big choices and you're not going to let anyone else help, be prepared to own everything.
Sure.
And it doesn't work out well.
Sure.
We used to do what we called the mad minute. You get on scene, you're sizing things up, have the mad minute, literally 60 seconds long, give me your ideas, and take a look at things and go, you know what? I like that part of your plan, that part of your plan, because everybody's thinking out of the box on problem solving. Here's the deal. I like that part of yours, this part of yours, that part of yours. Let's put this together and let's make this kind of work. Because we all have a tendency, even in rescue, we all have a tendency to kind of pre-program answers in our brains, even though we've never even seen the incident until you get there. It's already pre-programmed in your head. Well, this is the way I'm going to solve it. Till you get there and you kind of go, that's not going to work.
Because it wasn't really like what you thought it was in your pre-programming.
Yep.
But the thing that you guys are all saying that seems so important to me is, one, obviously listening to the input from other people that may have a good idea, despite some rank disparity or whatever it is. But the other thing is that you listen to all of them and you make a decision and say, okay, that's good. This is good. Whatever it is, this is what we're going to do. And you make a decision and make sure everybody knows what the decision is. And all that's really quick, but it's making that decision to have a plan and go with it is so important. And not something out of a book. You'd think, because that's what we're talking about, but we've all seen that so many times where the person in charge can't decide what's going on and the field teams are directionless. And that's kind of this whole point of leadership thing too, and I use an expression a lot that, I know where it came from, but I don't know if there was really a book there, but it's like, you manage things, but you lead people. And I have kind of this, as somebody that, theoretically got trained as some sort of a manager for whatever that's ever worth. I always kind of kept that in my mind that if it's something that's things, okay, you can manage them, but people take a different approach. And one of the things that I never liked was somebody that couldn't decide what was going to happen. And you brought it out, but we'll have to write a book, I guess.
Yeah, John, they vapor lock. If they don't have all the information, they can't make a decision.
And we never have all the information in a rescue. You know, we think we know what it is when we're going out there, and we talk about pre-planning on incidents. And, you know, I say this a ton of times in the search management class I teach with the state, is that some percentage, I don't know if it's 85, 90 or whatever, of the incidents, you know, search and rescue incidents are repeating. They've happened before, just like you guys in fire. You know, it's a car accident, it's a dumpster fire, it's whatever it is. But then there's always those ones that don't do it. You know, the victim you're searching for, the search subject, you know, didn't read the book and didn't follow directions and didn't go down the stream and went uphill, down up the side of the hill because they thought there was a road there and there wasn't. And, you know, so they're always going to fool you, but even though so many of them repeat, but you got to decide.
So, John, are you hinting at the book Lost Person Behavior there, that they didn't read the book?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of talking about, I wasn't really thinking about it, but that's generically what I refer to, is because we know that a certain number of people do things, and there's statistics that say you find these class of people in these locations at this distance, and some of them are right on. We've been very successful in the very few Alzheimer's patients and adult walkaways, dementia, whatever you want to call it. My team did not do a lot of those, but most of the ones we did, when we found them on the chart, it was like, damn, they read the book. They were within 0.7 miles uphill or whatever, you know. It was like funny.
Well, it is funny, and I'm going to be able to bring this back to a book. Watch this happen. They're probabilities, and somehow we're wowed when they are within the majority on a probability, and we're shocked when they're within the minority. But it was still a probability. So this brings me back to probably the most significant read for me in the last 18 months, which was recommended by Sean McKay in a very long phone call one night. Amy Duke, Thinking in Bets. Amy Duke is a educated psychiatrist, but really made her name on the World Series of Poker Tour. And she writes about how every decision we make, unless it's purely an emotional decision, comes back to what you're talking about probability. That we're making a bet, and we're making a bet with the best information we have. And sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong. And even if that bet is an 80-20 probability in our favor, it's a great hand, and we think we know what everyone else at the table has, there's still a 20% chance that someone's going to pull the magic card they need and beat you. And when that 20% happens, we're shocked. But the key takeaway from this one for me was her statement that you have to stop associating the quality of the outcome with the quality of the decision. If it was an 80-20 bet and you bet on the 80 and you lost, it wasn't a bad decision, it was a bad outcome. You would make that same decision again if you're smart. If you change your mindset and say, well, last time it was this, so I'm going to bet on the 20% and it comes back 80, you're disappointed. You just don't know math. So you have to break the quality of the outcome with the quality of the decision and stop analyzing one against the other. And to me, this comes back to risk analysis and rope. All right, we can do something that is risky many times before the probability catches up with us. And you know, some people refer to this as normalization of deviance. I just think it's probability that you can make a risky move over and over and over and over, and then someday it's going to turn around and bite you in the butt. And then we're shocked that time when it comes out and it bites us in the butt, when it was purely just probability from the outset that it was going to happen.
It's that standard bell curve thought philosophy, right? You know, that 3 sigma testing or whatever you want to call it, right? The outliers. Craig?
Yes.
I was told there would be no math.
Yeah, we lied, and there is a lot of math. And for the audiobook people, that Thinking in Bets is also a great audiobook. The author reads it herself, and she does a very good job. And I think she has a sequel to it out now, but I can't remember what it is.
That's awesome, man. I'm going to check that one out for sure. And like kind of to go along with that, man, I think we've all probably run into those folks who are incapable of making a decision because they're waiting for their probability, to be 100% in their favor. And that's never going to happen. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, right? Like, we got to take the information we have at the time. We got to, compute that as best as possible. And we got to, make a decision that is super good enough for that moment, and because ultimately, like in any type of operation, right, like forward progress has to be, you have to get that forward progress, and it'll never happen, if the people who are supposed to be making decisions can't, because they're waiting for everything to be perfect. And I think we've all probably seen that a good bit too. Decisions aren't always awesome, right? Like sometimes, like you said, sometimes that 20% happens and we weren't expecting it, but like the decision has to be made nonetheless, So no, that's cool. That's a really good way of thinking about it.
There is a 30% chance that 30% will happen.
There you go. 60% of the time it works every time, right?
Yep. Jason, I do like that you use super good enough. So how many How Not to Highline videos have you been watching recently? Way
too many. That guy is awesome, man. I love everything that guy does. Really cool.
I knew that was it.
That was a 100% reference from his. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, John, you've been quiet. We've either put you to sleep or you're thinking.
Oh, I turn my mic off when I'm thinking, but I'm writing down titles of books and going, oh, I guess I should be changing my type of reading or something like that from histories or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure that yet. 2 days ago in the airport, it was Bono Houston U2, and stuff like that. Doesn't exactly fit into this category.
All right, so I'll ask the question I wasn't going to ask, but I want to hear it. John? What's your go-to? What's the big technical rescue manual you pull out when you need something? And I'm going to tell you, you can't use the CMC manual right now. I'm taking that one off the table.
Yeah, that I don't know exactly why I would say it, but unfortunately or fortunately, more often than not, it's been Ashley lately where people have said stuff and Ashley's come out, whereas normally that wouldn't have been the case. It's just the time that there's been not questions that have come up, and that wouldn't be my normal one. Normally, it'd be Freedom of the Hills or something like that if I had to recommend a book, but it wouldn't, CMC Rescue Manual is too much of an inside track. But I understand there's been a revision of one of the other manuals like that, and I've got to go get one. That Vines and Hudson has been revised, right?
Oh, that's one I don't. That's a new one I don't have here.
Well, I've got two editions, but I understand there's been a new edition of it. So, yeah, I got to look that up.
So, Jason, same question. What's the go-to technical rescue manual for you?
When John said Ashley's, I was definitely nodding in approval because I would have to agree. Like, I've got that, just a couple feet behind me with all sorts of sticky notes in it, marking pages and stuff. I reference that book all the time. I don't quite call every knot by the associated number yet. Like, I'm not that nerdy. But no, I love that book. And then aside from that, like, I guess from the technical manual side of things, I like a lot of Tom Penley stuff. Pretty much everything that he puts out there, I think is good, solid reference material. Every once in a while, I might pull something like that up.
He also has a good sense of humor with his drawings too, if you pay attention.
He does, and the How Not To folks, the video that he just did was entertaining. With the power cord testing, that was really cool.
I learned a lot from that one. It changed my opinion on some power cord use.
That was freaking awesome. That was a really important one that they did. But yeah, man, a lot of Tom Penley stuff. Pat Rhodes has put some good stuff out there. I have, his books as well that occasionally I'll reference. Rich Delaney, especially when it comes to I really want to figure out the numbers on something. He certainly has a lot of good reference material for that. So, yeah.
All right, LeRoy, other than the 1847 Army Technical Rescue Manual.
It was 1969.
1969, okay? Sorry. Okay. What's the go-to?
And by the way, the math has not changed. The techniques have, but everything from 1969 is still applicable today. We just have cooler tools.
Yeah, I was gonna ask when you were reading that one or talking about that one, and then I got distracted by something shining on my desk. I'm sure. How much of that book is still valid? How much of that book do you still teach right from?
Probably 100% of it, and because they do get into gin poles and A-frames and artificial high directionals, it really comes down to, you got to remember the thought process then was there. Essentially came from World War II stuff that they learned, right? Army guys going out and building an FOB out in the middle of nowhere. It ain't like we can drive cranes up because they just didn't exist. So they had to figure out ways to build A-frames, gin poles, Spanish windlass, which is essentially a derivation of the capstan winch. It essentially uses the exact same formula mathematically. It's just a different gear ratios and all of those kind of things. And when you look at it, it's like, well, it's good enough for sailing around the world back in the day. And no, I wasn't there, Craig. But it was good enough for.
Were you on a college deferment at that point?
Richard. No, but when you look at the principles that they were working with, they were literally fabricating something out of nothing, which is essentially what we do in rescue, right? Except for our tools are way cooler than they were then, but their principles were rock solid. In fact, I was rereading the book the other day because I have no life, but I was actually looking through everything the other day, and I'm kind of like, oh, wait a minute, that's a vortex. Oh, wait a minute, that's a pterodactyl. Oh, wait a minute, that's a Harkin winch or a capstan winch. It really is, their baseline principles were awesome. My go-to, as far as books are concerned, other than Green Eggs and Ham and The Places You'll Go, and John McKently can attest to the Places You'll Go. Some good, some not quite so much. Ashley, I kind of go to often. And then, to be honest with you, I go to the Eider's manuals on a regular basis and the Nader's papers regularly.
Yes, you are an encyclopedia of that stuff.
I mean, because to me, I look back at some of the Nader's papers from, and John can attest.
I'm going to say, I looked at a Nader's thing from 1988 today.
Yeah,
what was it?
What was it?
Yeah.
It was Reed Thorne when he passed out the nomenclature. One of those things, because it wasn't bound volumes and all that, although I do have some bound Nader's things and stuff like that. But Doug and I were talking about it in the class last week, and so I pulled it out and was kind of reading through it this morning just kind of as a laugh, because I remembered it when it came out then, and it was passed out at Nader's 1988 in Fort Collins. LeRoy's shaking his head for the audience that doesn't know that.
All right. So those are your LeRoy, those are your go-tos, the Eider's papers, the Nader's papers. That's your.
Well, that and to be honest with you, if there's something I want to know history of, like thought process, how did we get to where we are today? That's the first place I go. And I'm that guy who never throws stuff away, especially when it comes to historical stuff as far as history is concerned and tech rescue is concerned. Every Nader's and Eider's, as evidenced by the library you typically see behind me in the normal podcast, I read them often because I think it's really important information to be able to explain to new guys who are using MPDs, Maestros, ASAPs, clutches, where did this all come from? In fact, today I was teaching and I mentioned Gold Line, which I know John knows about.
What's funny, because I have a couple of manuals from mountain rescue manuals from the 50s and 60s. And of course, it was Gold Line, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was hemp rope. And in some ways, things haven't changed. And in some things, God forbid that we don't do it that way. Split coil carries of victims and all kinds of stuff that's like, man.
Yep.
You know.
Well, and so in preparation for this, I actually went back and reread a book by Walt Wheelock.
Yeah.
One by Tim Setnica.
Oh, Setnica was more recent.
Then stuff by Royal Robbins.
Yeah.
Went back and reread it, and I was like, dang.
Royal Robbins and Walt Wheelock, La Siesta Press in Glendale.
Yep. And you look at what they were writing back, what's it got to be, 60s?
Oh, yeah, those? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think they're in the 60s. I mean, they're in paperback, and they're, maybe a half an inch thick if you're really.
You mean to turn around and get one.
But I mean, when you look at it, or when you think about what they had to say and the stuff they were talking about, unbelievable insight to 2023. Just as far as where they thought things were going, where they thought things were kind of progressing. And obviously, being in the 60s, John can attest to this. Lots of changes, right? In the 60s, major changes. 70s, bigger deal. 80s and 90s, holy crap. And here we are in 2023, and I'm still waiting for rescue by drone is what I'm waiting for.
It's going to happen. So I got to throw in my go-tos here. I don't think anybody has yet made the perfect pocket field guide. I frequently pull back to version 2 of Lipke's Conterra Rescue Guide. I think that one is very well put together, especially the reference section. I think the tables and charts in the back of that one are as good as they get. I'll second Jason. Delaney, his, roping physics for practitioners, whatever the
physics for roping technicians, I believe it's called.
I think that's probably closer to the right title. And he's been great with that. All he says is don't distribute and mess up his version control. But it's a great document. I frequently go to that one when I'm not sure quite how to explain something. I understand it, but I don't know how to explain it. And I can read his breakdown and find a better way to teach something. And then, John, I think I'm with you. Freedom of the Hills.
Yeah, not specific to rescue, but overall, for the mountain rescue people anyway. Yeah.
Yep.
That was a basic.
Yeah, basic, and it was written really for anyone who wanted to get out and try. Mm-hmm. It doesn't prescribe a lot of specific expensive gear. It just tells you what keeps you safe. And I think it's a really good baseline, and it's something we can pull back to occasionally to make sure we're not so toy focused with our solutions.
And it gets revised regularly.
It does. Not a job I would want.
No.
Well, gentlemen, is there anything that was sitting on your desk there you wanted to talk about you didn't get a chance to talk about?
I would highly recommend for people that are really geeks is
if they're still here, they're a geek. Keep going.
We're just on a really long car ride.
Yes.
I have no life, and
or have an insomnia issue, something. But all right,
this will solve it. But the one that kind of dovetails into Richard's stuff is the papers, and they're online, as far as I know, at the IDER's website, is the stuff written by Steve Attaway. Steve, I don't know, John, would you think he was kind of ahead of his time as far as a rope geek?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was an academic with a PhD and definitely thought about that stuff. The presentation he made regarding edge friction and everything like that we still show was definitely something that got a lot of people talking, especially when you really put numbers to it. I didn't agree with everything he said in it, but I know that when you were doing the polling, it was probably pretty realistic.
Well, and we reference it in the class all the time.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things. I don't think until the time he made that presentation that it was on really anybody's radar screen. But a lot of the stuff that he put out, and like you said, he was an academic in the PhD, and it hurts my brain to, read the papers because I have to actually think. But a lot of what he said had a lot of validity, and he was a rescue guy on top of it, which, to me adds some credence to what he had to say. And then the other one was also up on the IDER's website was the Tom Moyer stuff that Tom has put out over the years. Not only from the standpoint of just water testing, but some of their other observations. And, some of the investigations and things that he has been on, to me, were pretty significant learning moments.
Yeah, LeRoy, I look to those for methodology as well.
Yeah,
and testing.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, he is a very good methodical testing kind of guy. And Steve, as an academic, you're not going to get a better testing methodology than
Well, and that's the thing that we've always said about Tom Moyer when he was an engineer, and he did it right, and you could trust him. And being involved in IDERs, in full disclosure, you do have to think about the things you read because they're not peer reviewed, and a lot of them are really, really good, and there are some that aren't so good, and you have to be careful.
John, I have personal experience that any clown can get up there and speak.
I wasn't referring to you on that. Though. LeRoy knows some of the ones that I'm thinking about, and most people that have been there for a while knows. But just because it's out there, you have to think about it, and you have to look at their methodologies. And you look at the methodologies from somebody like Tom Moyer, or quite honestly ourselves, and then you look at some other people's testing, and there's a lot of difference. And the listeners, if they go to that, you need to look at it, and you need to think about it, and you need to know who's doing what and what they did before you just take the conclusions.
I do recall a certain individual, I don't remember the state that he resided in, but I believe it was towards the middle of the country.
Well, I do exactly, but I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, let's be nice here, John.
Neither am I.
All right.
But, pull testing with a pickup truck is not necessarily recommended. We'll just leave it at that.
All right. So, John, anything you were dying to talk about we didn't give you a chance to say?
Nothing that I'm dying to talk about, except there's a lot of material out there, and not only in rescue techniques, and it's continually changing, and leadership. And you guys brought up things, and I've got 10 things listed on my list here that now I've got to go read.
Excellent. We hope we did that for others.
There'll be a test later.
No, man. I would agree with John. It was a good conversation, and I've got a much bigger list of stuff that I need to read now than I did when we started. So, what better way to do a podcast? You get to talk about cool stuff, and you get to learn something too. So, no, it was cool. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for your time. You can reach any one of us, just as a note, podcast at cmcpro.com. We will get your questions to the right host. If you have other books you think we should be reading or you think we were wrong, let us know. We can all learn from these conversations. Thank you for listening. And, see you again on the CMC Podcast.